Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we're going to explore the Wand Chronicles with author Michael Ross. And we're starting with Elfistra, the Sorceress. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to meet you, Denise.
It's a pleasure to meet you too. Thank you for calling in by Skype from close to Manchester, England. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. That's right. Yeah.
How did you get started on this series?
Well, it was always an ambition of mine to write something that was fantasy. I've written quite a number of other books of all sorts of genres, from children to scary stories and true life story and so on. But it's always been a passion of mine. I've always had this imaginative mind, and I've wanted to put them down on paper. So once I cut my teeth on the other books, this was going to be the classic one for me. And I didn't want to just write a book and then that was the end of it. And if you've looked through the book, you'll see that I've got images in there. I've got some true life sayings in there. I've got a glossary. I've got even a table of phonetic help. So to me, it's my classic in a way. And I wrote the very first book in the series is called The Prequel. So it just gives you an idea what's happening. But then the three major books, they're the ones, we're talking about 350,000 words. And I'm really pleased. It's something that is now on my shelf, and I can look up and pat myself on the back in a way, because it was my first real test as an author, to be honest, of a work that big and that classic sort of a work.
It is really a classic. It encompasses the fairy realm, the connection between two worlds, two cultures that are learning about each other and helping each other. But I love the whole world building aspect on both sides of the portal. It also deals with global warming, politics, social issues. The antagonist, the bully, the all-around bad guy, and then it's, personal relative of one of the main characters. There's climate change, the loss of bumblebees, there's nuclear destruction, and it's just all put together with well thought out, rich characters, and it's an incredible journey that you just want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a few days to read, but I couldn't put it down. It was only a little over 500 pages, almost 600.
Yeah.
So congratulations. But was it your intent to include all of these things, or was that just in the making of the story?
Well, I always think there's a little bit of the author's feelings and characters that come into the books. That's the first thing. I come from an acting background. So, it's one thing having human characters in there that you can explore with all the emotions that come with it. But then you might have an elf. So what do you do with this elf? So I wanted all the other elves in the story to have personalities. And when I say personalities, when I say an acting background, in a similar sense to Meryl Streep, Dustin Hoffman, I'm a method actor. So I can tell you with each one of those characters where they would like to go on vacation, how long they like to sleep at night, would they like children, would they not, what do they like to read, what do they like to eat. So I get a really good picture of it. And the success for me is if people say, you know, that elf that you wrote in there, Alana, she's real, isn't she? And I said, yes, she is. She's very real to me anyway. But I've made them as realistic as possible. The world building, I mean, that's the other thing as we get into it. And I knew, for example, that the English hero in it was going to be taken into this grand elvish dimension called Lania Kia and into one of the principal elves' houses. Well, you know, I imagined myself in this house, and it had to be a little different, not only in the shape, but what you experienced when you were in. And when he went in for the first time, he noticed that the walls were moving a little bit. And the elf told me to put my hand on the wall. And when you did, then you know how we have photo albums. Suddenly, you get all the photos of her family and history that seem to be there, that come into your mind. So it was just this building up all the way. Then you go out of the house, and I wanted to see a vista out there that was completely different. So, I mean, for a start, they have planets which are the same ones we have, but they come so close you could almost touch them. And then unusual trees, and then of course there's all the different animals they've got there. So I build it up as I write it. It all builds up.
Wow, and I love the way that in the elfin world you traveled. That was key. And then the whole yin and yang behind it.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying about the traveling on this elvish dimension of Lania Kia. I mean, let's face it, it's huge. If we were to put our planet on the elvish dimension, it would be a period. Stop, nothing else. That's how small we are compared to this land. And of course, they had to travel from one end to the other. So how did they do it? So I started researching something that we have on this planet in real life, which are called ley lines. I mean, if you look, for example, in England and in France in the old days, all the churches were lined up on imaginary lines, and they were called ley lines, the spiritual lines. So I decided to bring that into the story. The elves have managed to develop that, and you can travel around great distances in a very short time. In fact, when they get together, that's one of the things that the elves share with the humans, and they then bring our own ley lines so that they all work for us.
Would you say that a lot of the background of the story and where it takes place was based on England or the England countryside, or is it another area you've traveled to?
No, it actually all happens, and this is the honest truth. It all happens a mile from where I live. Can you believe that? And this Wimbury Wood is there, and in there, Hugo, the main character in this, the English general, came across this portal. Now, the portal was there to introduce us to the elves, but it was put there by a higher body because they could see what we were doing as humans and making a mess of our planet, really. And so they thought, let's get the elves in there to help the humans, remembering that the elves have been around for about 3 million years longer than we have. So they're a lot more evolved, a lot more sensible. And so at first it was a little bit problematic, but then we got to work together. And of course, it moves on from that to having the very first hybrid human elf child, a girl called Kia, who becomes one of the most powerful empaths you could ever come across.
I thought that was really ingenious and well weaved. And were any of these people based off of people that you knew in real life?
Yeah. I mean, there's elements of me in there. All the good guys, I'm telling you now, that's me, okay? But the bad guys are people that we all come across, in everyday life, and maybe what you see at the cinema or on TV. And it's good for the story to have somebody that you literally hate. And he keeps escaping. I mean, karma doesn't seem to work on him at first, but don't worry. Most of those characters that are in there, they get their just desserts at the end. But I just felt it had to be as rich as possible, the whole storyline. I mean, we've got the goodies, we've got the baddies, and then we've got those that are the sophisticated ones. There's a love interest of Hugo, who keeps coming in and causing trouble. And by now, Hugo is fallen in love with a beautiful elvish girl called Alana. But then this English girl really doesn't like the fact that he likes the elvish girl. So I'm bringing all sorts of plots into this all the time.
And it was great. And while there was a lot of people and relationships to keep track of, it was amazingly easy. They were so well woven together, and they were so rich and dynamic that the villain or villains were very easy to hate, and you love to hate them. They're that strong of characters. And then to set the whole oppressor type situation was really good. The dynamics of meeting a new culture of people, much like when you travel and you go to a culture that's completely different from your own. I thought you gave good balance on, how to and how not to. That was so cute.
One of the things that I think is also really important, if, for example, we look at Tolkien and they are brilliant books, there's not a lot of laughs, I mean, there's a lot of, there's times I've read some of Tolkien and I felt like jumping off a river bridge, because it's just, there's a lot of depressive, dark things in there, which you can have in, but I think it's also important to have humor. And I think you can have humor in the deepest, darkest times. So I introduced a character into this. He's a little Chinese guy, and he's the bravest man you'll ever come across. He's the aide to the main character, Hugo, and his name is Dingling. And Dingling is always around to jolly people up. He just happens to be that sort of character. And he'll always quote Confucius. I mean, it's important to him. And for example, there's one scene where Hugo is deciding to do two major things at the same time. And Dingling knows it won't work. He's trying to tell him, and he's not listening to him. So he tries to explain it via Confucius. So he says to Hugo, look, master, it's like you never take a sleeping tablet if you've taken a laxative pill. So then, so all the way through it, these little bits of humor come from Dingling when he quotes Confucius. And it's important to get in, I think.
Oh, definitely. It had all of those laughs and giggles along the way, but it also had mind reading, which brought a lot of funny situations about because one party didn't realize another party was doing it. And also the fitness of different characters and the way that the dynamics of how their bodies worked on the human side and the fairy side. What's your background in fitness that you came up with their abilities and strengths and weaknesses?
Well, amongst the other things I've done, I've also developed, and I'm a CEO of a fitness brand called Ket Fusion. It's in the top 3 in the UK, and you can find it in 3 other European countries. So that physical side I knew about. I'm also, I mean, you're looking at me now, and I'm probably about 150 years of age because I've done lots of things, but I was also a consultant microbiologist. So I could bring your experience from that into it. And I wanted an elf if you get an elf guy and an elf girl, how different are they to humans? And it couldn't be the same. I know they've got pointed ears and they've got arms, legs. So there's a connection there somewhere, which I explain in the book. But then the world that I developed is the men that stay at home and have the babies, because they're hermaphroditic, they have the babies. And it's the women that are the warriors and the scientists and the clear thinkers. And I think that happens a lot in this country and other countries as well. We need more respect for women. Power to the ladies. So that's comes across in my book.
It definitely comes across, as well as the science. It encourages the reader to ask more questions and look into a couple of different things. I was really impressed with that. I was impressed with the way that their strengths and weaknesses work differently, and how the variations in gravity between one place and another would cause that, which does happen in real life when you travel, depending on elevations. It was just so incredibly magical and just like kind of whisked you away. So you keep reading into the middle of the night, early morning. So going forward, how many will be in this series?
Well, it's a finished series in a sense. After that one you've got there, which is, you see, I didn't know this, but in America, you can have 4 books in a trilogy. I'm still trying to work that out in the UK. But of course, the first book is just a free book that people can get an idea of what's happening in the series. But the series proper starts with Elfristra. Then we have the next book, similar size, which is Keir the Empath. And then we have the third and final book in the series, which is Eternity. So it carries on. The story carries on. They meet a lot more characters. They have more adventures. And does it end well in the end for the humans and the elves? Well, who knows?
Nice. What are you working on next?
Well, I'm working on one called The Big Fairy Adventures. And, I said before, I like this idea of a little bit of humor and bringing all that into it. And The Big Fairy Adventures centers around a fairy called Tinker Tanker. Now, she's called Tinker Tanker by her friends because she's a little bit overweight. Not problem with that at all. She just likes her nectar too much. She just cannot stop eating it. But I brought Dingling, the Chinese guy, over into this as well. And they're really good friends. And they have these adventures within the fairy kingdom. It's called Les Lemony, this wonderful fairy, which is even bigger than the Elvish kingdom, as it happens. And you'll always know when Tinker Tanker's coming along because she's bumping into walls a little bit. She's a little bit overweight, so her wings can't really carry it in a straight line. So, but she is the bravest fairy you could ever want to see. Now, people ask me with that one, well, how many books are you doing? I said, I'm going to do quite a few in this series, maybe about 20, I think. Well, how did you come up with it? So I have a map. It's a map of the fairy kingdom. And on the map, there's little images of different species or of places on the fairy kingdom. And each one of those will be a story book. But what's in the book, I have no idea till I sit down, think of that image, and I'll start that book and write it. So that's how it works for me.
All right. But you're a tough guy. And you seem like you're a guy's guy. You're involved in a gym. You're in good shape. You've been in acting. And you live in England. So you would think very proper. And then where did you get this love of fairies and all of this? Because you would expect that from Scotland, because Scotland, after all, they have a unicorn as their national animal. But England is very known to be very proper. So,
well, of course, in England, we have something called Stonehenge, which is a very spiritual place. And people come from all around the world to come to visit Stonehenge. We have the ley line, so there is quite a lot of fairies, particularly from Old England. Lots of
Really?
fairies come into it. I mean, I brought it in only because I'm not frightened about saying that I believe in fairies, and coming up with those sorts of fantasy stories that centers around fairies. And the more I've come to think about fairies, I've realized that people all around the world like fairies. And part of my inspiration was I built a very big fairy garden. I mean, it's got everything in it, from water features to little houses, lots of fairies and so on. And that's become quite a place to visit now. And I built that at the start of lockdown. So for the children, it would be nice to think that to them, the memories of the very first big lockdown we had will be happy ones. And so I've got this wonderful garden. I only have to look out from my author's den and look at the fairy garden, and it just sets me off in the right frame of mind.
Wow. Do you have your own children? Do you have a lot of daughters?
Well, I'll tell you something. No, I've got lots of sons. I stopped at 3 sons because I didn't want to end up with a football team. I would have loved to have a daughter, and I do have one in a way. I've got a little cherub tattooed on my right hip, and she's called Lily. So that's my daughter. That's what I've decided to call it.
That's fantastic. You have such a whimsical way of bringing us into the story and making it so believable and quirky and funny. And, it's just this range of emotions that we go through. We definitely understand the villains that are involved, and we want to avoid them. And we want our favorite characters to avoid them. So what was your background training? Is English something that you went to school for, majored in?
To be really honest with you, I'm English, and I went to English schools over here. I went to a boarding school as well, and obviously learned English. I mean, I passed the exams at school, but not particularly well. But it was a visit that started me off on this whole idea of writing. I went to a clairvoyant. And she said the normal things, which always goes over the top of my head. You're a horse in the field. You're bringing one hoof out, and then you will become an eagle. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, fine. But right at the end, she said to me, you know what? You've got to write. I can see it here. And she grabbed me by the shoulders, and she's going, right. I said, okay, all right, I'll think about it. And that's how it started. I started writing some comedic little stories on Facebook. And people said, why don't you put it in a book? And then I discovered Amazon KDP, where you could create a book for nothing, really. So, and that set me off on the story of writing. I wouldn't have said my English is particularly good. In fact, I have to tell you this very quick little story. I've got a wonderful editor. And when I send my manuscripts to her, they come back. I mean, there's red lines through all of it, and you should do this and you should do that. But worst of all, I get a 3 or 4 page report. And it's like if you've ever been in front of the principal for something naughty. And I'm standing in front of her, and she's telling me all these things. And when she's finished, I always wonder if maybe English isn't my first language. But she's right. She's right, and she's absolutely superb. She knows how my mind works, so we're lucky.
It's fantastic. It reads beautifully. It's flows. So good teamwork.
Yeah.
So what's the next on your adventure list? Is there another book coming soon?
Yes. Well, you know what? I decided I have an illustrator. And my illustrator I met right with at the very beginning of the career with writing. And she's Croatian, lives in Croatia. And she, again, I could just give her 4 or 5 sentences and she could read my mind. I seem to meet lots of women who can read my mind. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But anyway, so she can create these wonderful book covers. And She's also a teacher, so we decided to write a book together for a school in Croatia. And we brought out a bilingual book for small children called What is a School? Because it must be frightening for kids, to go to school for the first time. And then I got in touch with some of the reading group there. These are 10 to 11-year-olds. Their English is superb, by the way. And they drew some pictures for me, and we've got them in the book. And that book is now a bestseller. So following on from that, I wrote a book called The Moon and the Magic Box. It's an adventure story for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And it's been so well received here and in Croatia that they want me to do a sequel. So I'm going to do one. I'm going to stop with the third book I'm doing now of the Big Fairy Adventures, and I'll write this new sequel, and nobody else knows the title except all you guys now. It's going to be called A Box Full of Aliens. And it's just perfect for that sort of age group. And I'm going to get them to draw images, and I'm going to put them in the book, so they'll be part of the book as well.
What age group would you say this book was for?
Okay. I've had 9-year-olds read it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, there's no out and out sex in it. There's no profanity in it. I don't think it was necessary to do that. What I did bring in, there's a lovely ceremony when Hugo, the hero in it, and the heroine, Alana, the elf, want to express their love for each other, but it's a very spiritual ceremony that they do. So it's easy for small children to read, really. So from 9 right the way up to 99 years of age and beyond even.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing so much about how this magical book came about. We're looking forward to seeing more from you.
Thank you.
And the details, astounding.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you want the magic of a world like Harry Potter or The Hobbit, the Wand Chronicles will bring you to a truly new and magical location.